Good evening. My name is Phil Schomber. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Before we begin, I do want to thank the League of Women Voters of Janesville for co-sponsoring tonight's program. It's always great when we have that kind of support. I also want to thank JATV for recording the program. That gives anybody who couldn't make it tonight but wanted to a chance to watch it later. Again, that's a great service to all of our patrons. And now it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker, former Wisconsin State Senate Majority Leader Tim Cullen. Tim has written a number of books. The most recent is Wisconsin Gerrymandering, the fight for permanent fair maps and why it matters. And he's going to share some of the insights from his book with us tonight. So would you please welcome Tim Cullen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Well, first of all, this is going on tonight because of the League of Women Voters. They didn't exactly get credit for that in the paper this morning, but they're the reason that I had a chance to be here, and I was pleased as heck to have them invite me to come and talk about the book. So I just want to, I just say that right away. I'm not running for anything. You know. Wise man. Representative Conley says, wise man. Well, anyway, I do appreciate the League arranging for this. And I've got plenty of books. And in fact, I brought along some of my books that I wrote about how and why we lost the General Motors plant. And so that book, all the costs are paid for already. I wrote it 5 years ago and paid off. Everybody had to pay, not pay off in the bad sense. Editor, publishers, you know, printer, etc. But I've still got some of them, and I thought, well, I'll just come tonight, and if anybody wants to buy my book and buy that one, I'll sell that one for $10. And it'll all be profit, and all that $10 will go to the scholarship fund. So if anybody's interested, I got a few of those. I'm still sweating from carrying the box upstairs. I had one guy that was very helpful in helping carry some of it up. But anyway, back to gerrymandering. Why I wrote the book, I had watched gerrymandering from a distance. I was on the board of Common Cause in 2008, 2009, and the Democrats had total control of state government in 2009 and 2010. Governor Doyle was a Democratic governor, and Dems had both houses. And a bunch of us from Common Cause and other groups went to the Democrats in the legislature and said, while you've got the power, while you've got control, before 2010 election, adopt an Iowa-type plan to take the power of drawing maps out of the hands of the legislature and give it to an impartial person, the same person that drafts all the rest of the legislation for the state legislature to consider. They would also draw the maps, and they couldn't consider partisan makeup of election results, et cetera. And they didn't do it at all. I privately assume, now I'm saying it publicly since this is being taped, but like any other group in power in Madison, you kind of think you're going to stay in power. And I think they thought they would probably do okay in 2010, or at least control some part of government, the governorship or one of the houses. Well, 2010 ended up being a pretty big Republican year at the polls. Topped the ticket, Governor Walker won fairly comfortably, and the Republicans gained several seats in the legislature, that's normal. If the top of the ticket does real well, that party should do better at the lower level races. So guess what? They won. They had the majority. They had total control of state government in 2011. The rest is history. They gerrymandered. But I make clear in the book that we're about 14 miles from Beloit right now, and I say that gerrymandering is actually not a partisan issue. It's an abuse of power issue, and neither party is pure on it. And no better example we have is the Republicans gerrymandered in Wisconsin, and the Democrats gerrymandered in Illinois, both of them in 2011, and they both continued it in 2021. So it's an abuse of power issue, and in fact, I think some people I think may think that as a Democrat, I should have wrote a book that was much more slanted towards the Democrats, and I just try to write it right down the middle. And everybody, if you're doing a good job, you don't have to worry about how something is written. You'll do all right. The problem with gerrymandering, a lot of people go, well, I don't know if I care that much about gerrymandering, but I sure care about public education or whatever it might be, taxes or roads, whatever. Well, the thing is that when you have a gerrymandered legislature, it actually affects all the issues that you care about out beyond gerrymandering. And if you're a big supporter of public education, you might not do so well, you might do better, but you're gambling on it. You're doing okay, or at least getting a fair shake you're gambling on having fair maps. If you've got a gerrymandered map, you're going to either be real happy or real unhappy with what the legislature does. So that's, I think a big part of this is knowing that this is one of those issues that are, you say, well, that's just those guys in Madison, but guys and women in Madison. I have to be careful. I have to correct myself, even when Ms. Conley's not even around. Where did the gerrymander word come from? And you go back to 1812 in Massachusetts. They had drawn a map up. They were redistricting, and they drew a map, and one district was just so contorted that a reporter for the Boston newspaper called it a salamander. That this thing looked like a salamander. It was just unbelievable. And in fact, even put claws on the end of the district. But then the Governor Elbridge Gerry, with a hard G, Elbridge Gerry signed it, and then the reporter thought, oh, we don't have to call this a salamander. We'll call it a gerrymander. And that's the word stuck. What has changed, of course, is across the nation. It's a soft G, not a hard G, but it's named after the governor of Massachusetts, who then later that year, by the way, was elected vice president of the United States with President James Madison, and then died in office like 2 years later. So, but his name lives on across the nation for this issue. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to trace back reapportionment, which is what gerrymandering is fixing the books on the reapportionment. Reapportionment has to occur every 10 years following the census. So the census occurs in the year that ends in 0, and the reapportionment occurs in the year that ends in 1. And we've had a census, by the way, little things I learned which have nothing to do with gerrymandering, but we've had a census since 1790. 2 years after Washington was elected, we started having a census in this country. And it's to try to have the same reflected changes in population over the previous 10 years, and then have that reflected in the legislative districts having similar, if not perfect, but very close as possible, the same number of people in this district as in that district. But it hasn't worked out perfectly in so many ways. But I went back and got some great help from a book written by the Legislative Reference Bureau, and I looked at what happened in the years going way back to before we were a state. When we were a territory, we had a territorial legislature, and back then, before we were a state, the territorial legislature, the rules were, the law was that the governor drew the maps for the legislature, and the legislature had no part in it whatsoever. Then we became a state in 1848 and adopted a constitution and everything else, and they reversed it. They threw the governor over the side and said, the legislature will only draw the maps. And that kind of stuff went on. Only one story I found from that era, nothing to do with gerrymandering, but I found it interesting anyway. We had a gubernatorial election in 1855, and you kind of wonder why would we have a gubernatorial election in an odd-numbered year. That's because we had a Wisconsin census at the 5-year point. So the feds did the census, then 5 years later we did the census, and then the feds, and that resulted in an election of a governor in 1855. And what happened? It was so close that a lower level court said they both won. And honest to God, so that was in the fall of 55. In January of 56, in Madison, at 2 different locations, 2 guys were sworn in as governor of Wisconsin. I know. I'm reading this, I'm going, I can't believe this happened. And finally, the state Supreme Court, 2 months later in March, said, no, this guy won, not that guy. But I put the picture of both those governors in the book. So, but for 2 months, we had 2 governors. But the people were writing about it didn't tell me about anything. They probably just didn't do anything for 2 months, is I would guess probably what happened. Then, of course, like I said, the legislature did it. And you couldn't tell much back then whether there was any gerrymandering because the courts never used the word. And then what happened was the historians didn't use it either. If the courts didn't use it, they didn't think they could use it. But there was one thing they did which sure looks and smells and everything else like a gerrymander. They had something called that the counties had to remain intact. What that meant was you could not have an assembly seat that was part in Rock County and part in Walworth County. You could have assembly seat was in 2 full counties, but you couldn't have parts of 2. And and a lot of the legislative control of any governors in the late 1800s and early 1900s was a lot of it was controlled by Republicans, and that would be a plus if you had you could have a assembly seat with just one county, and that could maybe the population make it pretty small. It wasn't very close to being equal population, but and that actually was upheld by the state Supreme Court in 1892, and went on and on and on back into the 1900s. That county's intact rule, and what it really hurt was a county like Milwaukee and Dane County that were growing like crazy, but they weren't getting any more legislators, and it really got out of whack. There was one point where the Milwaukee County was entitled to, if you just divided up the districts by equal population, they should have had 25 assembly seats in the Milwaukee County. They only got 20. And the other 5 were spread out in rural counties with very, very small populations. But that all finally got changed in 1960, following the 60 census. And we had divided government, and we couldn't reach an agreement. In fact, they couldn't reach an agreement all the way into, so the 1962 election was run on the maps of the 1950s. And then they got together, and the state Supreme got involved for the first time. They never got involved before. And they drew the maps, which were not gerrymandered, for the 64 election. And then from 1970, something I think you might get a kick out of, we actually had in 1970, 71, of course, we had what was actually a bipartisan gerrymander. Now you think about how could those 2 words be next to each other in the same sentence, right? Well, Governor Lucey was the governor, Pat Lucey, a Democrat, who I knew pretty well, quite a guy. He was a big time guy, supported John F. Kennedy in 1960. That was in an era where he was a business person. He had a big realty company. He thought he could work with Republicans in the state Senate, which was controlled by the Republicans. And he probably could in that era. In fact, I watched him. He did when I got up there. He did do that. So what he said was, when the 2 houses couldn't agree, the Dems controlled the Assembly, the Republicans controlled the Senate. So he said, I'll tell you what, he said, you Democrats in the Assembly, you draw your maps, and you Republicans in the Senate, you draw your maps, and I'll sign it. So what happened? Democratic gerrymander in the Assembly, Republican gerrymander in the Senate. He signs them into law. Now, how that affected me, and any of you that live in Janesville, was that the 15th district, always before that time, included almost all of Janesville. Sometimes it didn't have a ward or 2, but almost all of Janesville. Well, the incumbent then was a Republican from Elkhorn named James Swan. He was a state senator. Well, he didn't want Janesville anymore, because for those who aren't 100 years old, until the late, starting in the 1960s, Janesville and Rock County was Republican, significantly Republican. It just gradually turned with the Civil Rights Act and all this stuff of the 60s and everything that happened in the Vietnam War. And so by 1970, it was getting to be a much more Democratic area. And Senator Swan didn't want Janesville anymore. So he got rid of all of Janesville except a Republican ward on the east side. Now he's 45,000 people short of having the number you got to have in the Senate district. So they just went over in western Racine County, and what is essentially today Speaker Robin Voss's district, Burlington and Waterford, in that area. And they found 45,000 people over there and put it in the district. So that made it a 58% Republican district. And I was working for Congressman Aspen, and I was thinking about running for the seat in 1964. I was thinking about it before they did all that. But then I had one thing going for me, which is one way I talk about in the book, is that one thing you can do, one way you can overcome a gerrymander and win an election is if there's a top of the ticket huge issue where the minority party is going to do really, really well. Well, we had something in 1974 called Watergate. And I didn't know all that was going to happen, but I knew it was going to be a Democratic year. And so I got in the race, and I had to move into a rental place. We had to move in a rental place over in that one ward to run, because the house we lived in was 3 blocks out of the district. On Ringgold, you think about how close Ringgold, it's like almost downtown, and it was not in the district. So I got in, but then what I didn't know was that Nixon was going to have to resign in July in disgrace because they caught him lying about what his role in Watergate, that was the name of the building in Washington and where the Democratic headquarters was, and it was broken into by the Republicans to get information and blah, blah, blah. And it should have been a little deal, except they started lying, and that sometimes makes it a big deal. So he resigns, and then Barry Goldwater and some other Republicans went down to the White House to tell him that they were going to, looked like they were going to impeach him. And the Republican senators went down to the White House to tell Nixon, we don't have the votes. You are going to get impeached. You're better off to resign. So he did. So in July, Nixon resigns, and he basically admits that he was lying about Watergate. Now the nation is even more angry at the Republicans, so it's even going to be a better year for guys like me in this situation. And then to top it all off in September, his hand-picked vice president, Gerald Ford, pardons him. Now, why he was his hand-picked guy was his first vice president was crooked, Spiro Agnew, and he was taking cash in the governor's office when he was governor of Maryland. That's not a good idea, I don't think. And so there was a vacancy. The president nominated somebody to the Senate. He nominated Gerald Ford. He was the House minority leader at the time. And I thought, pretty quality, decent guy, actually. But then he pardons him. And then right the way the whole story was across the nation. This was a cut deal. I'll make you vice president. I'll nominate you for vice president, but you got to pardon me if I have to leave. And that made it even bigger Democratic year. And so it was kind of exciting. Election night, I had all of Beloit. That was the only Democratic area I had besides East Troy. And I thought, if I could get 65% of Beloit, I got a chance. And Beloit always comes in first. If you follow elections, they get down to their city hall earlier or faster. I don't know how or why. But by 8:30 usually on election night, you know what the results are in Beloit. So I thought if I get 65%, election returns came in, and I got 73% of Beloit. I thought, whoa, got a chance. And the rest is history. That dwindled the rest of the night. I finally won with 53. But I say in the book, humorously, that I never got a chance to thank Richard Nixon or Gerald Ford for awfully nice of them to help me out, but never had a chance to. So, and Lucy worked well with Republican state senators. But that night, then 3 other Democratic state senators won. And one of them was Katie Morrison from Platteville, who was the first woman ever elected to the state senate. And we've been a state since 1848. And the women had to vote by 1920. It was still 54 more years before a woman was elected to the state senate. And she was just terrific. She was a professor, economics professor at Platteville, and just so well-liked, so smart. But the problem was that the people who built the Capitol in 1920, I think they thought there might not ever be a woman in the state senate because there was a men's bathroom just off the floor of the state senate and a women's bathroom way down there. Well, a few of us guys got real smart real fast, and Katie didn't complain or say anything, nor did the women who were staffers and pages and stuff. But we just carved out, we put a wall in and made this men's bathroom smaller and took some space from the legislator's office on the other side and built a women's restroom exactly as far from the Senate floor as the men's restroom, and the world went on without. But she was something else. She died of cancer a few years ago. It was a terrific person. So the 60s, from the 60s until 2010, we never had one party control state government after the census. And so what happened was the 70s were settled the way I just said, and then in the 80s and 90s and 2000, after those years census, Federal judges drew the maps, and they did a fine job. They didn't. There was no gerrymander or anything like that. And then we get to 2010. The reason why that sort of matters is if the last gerrymander before 2011 was maybe in the 50s, and that's not completely clear, you'd have to be pretty doggone old today to be an adult in the 1950s. I wasn't even an adult in the 1950s. And so that's why I think that that happened. But it was great. So Tommy Thompson, talking to him about this, he said he was always happy he never had to deal with gerrymandering. And because even though he served all that time, the two censuses that came during his term, there was divided government, so there wasn't any pressure or whatever to even try to gerrymander. So they didn't. But then along comes 2011, and I say in the book that the gerrymander of 2011 had lots of implications beyond just gerrymandering. One of them was Act 10. Why I connected to was that usually you start working on maps shortly into that year that ends in one, and you have to have them in place by at least the summer of the year that ends in 2, just before the elections. There's a deadline the Elections Commission sets for that. And they rushed through a gerrymander map faster than ever before, and usually it would take until they used almost all that year and then part of the next year before they settled on the maps. They had the maps drawn, passed, signed, etc. by July of 2011. And why did that matter? And there was always a story about how they showed the maps to each legislator. They showed them their own district, but not the whole gerrymandered map, just their own district. Why was that important for Act 10? Because a lot of them were concerned about voting for Act 10 like Governor Walker wanted, because many of them had good relationships with teachers and people in public education back home, and they weren't looking forward to doing that. Well, by jamming the gerrymander through right away and then showing them their map, they all of a sudden thought, I can vote with Walker on Act 10, and I ain't going to get beat because of the map. And because the only election you can lose if there's a map, if there's a gerrymander map, is the primary. You can't lose the general. The maps decide that. And so all they had to worry about then was sticking with the team, because it was so rough around there for those years. If you didn't stick with the team, your own leader would find an opponent for you in the primary. How's that for a bunch of nice guys? And that affected the mining bill. That was the other big bill I remember at that time. So it made a big difference. It allowed those Republican legislators to stick with Walker and not worry about re-election. So sometimes these things that look like they aren't really policy oriented, they really have impact on policy, and that's what happened there. So we had a gerrymander from 2011, and what you try to do with a gerrymander, there's ways to draw the maps, but one of the things you try to do is you try to stuff as many of the minority party voters in a small number of districts. The majority party doesn't care if the Democrats got an 80% Democratic district. They actually like that, as long as the majority party can create districts that are 60-65% for them. And you do that by pushing all the minority party into other districts. And that's really what went on. And I started talking to Dale Schultz, who was a Republican state senator from over Richland Center, and he was actually against gerrymandering. And we started talking about doing something about it, and we thought, well, we could go around the state together, so it's a Democrat and a Republican, and it made it easier for groups to invite us, like the League, for example, or some noon service club. They might get some blowback if they're having just a Dem or just a Republican talking about something. And so we went around the state, and lots of our places, we never sought a place to talk, we just accepted invitations. And the League was terrific. We went all over. We went to Superior. We went to Ashland. We went all over, and it was great fun. And we did that for a few years. What was interesting was when we first started doing it, the people who attended our events had almost no knowledge of the issue of gerrymandering. We had to begin with a very basic elementary discussion of what gerrymandering is and so on and so on. And what we noticed, though, as the years went on, there was much more education that had occurred, and our audiences, we didn't have to start with elementary school discussion of the thing. We could go right to the big time stuff. So it was really clear to us that the public was now aware of this issue when they never should have been or would have been before that. Well, then they gerrymandered again in 2021, and it went to the state Supreme Court. And the states. This is one of the saddest things that's happened just in my lifetime up there, is that I remember very well the days when our state Supreme Court was not partisan at all. And in fact, the way you got elected or re-elected to the Wisconsin Supreme Court was you went out and found a retired Democratic governor and a retired Republican governor, and you got them to be your co-chairs of your campaign, and the campaign was over. That was like guaranteed victory, because that was a broad signal that they were going to govern from the middle, whatever the right thing was they were going to do. And those days are just gone now. I mean, there's going to be a big Supreme Court race in the spring of 2025, and Walsh Bradley is retiring. And the court has now looked at just completely openly. Is it a 4-3 liberal majority, or is it a 4-3 conservative majority? And they vote in those blocks all the time. And we've got these fair maps now, but if the conservative wins that election in 2025, we could some conservative organization will bring the maps to that court for sure, and we'll see what happens. So it's not over. And I'm talking about how would I fix this if I were king for a day, and the first thing I do, I would adopt an Iowa-like plan. And I say Iowa-like because we're Wisconsin, they're Iowa. So we're not exactly the same. And their plan, which has been in place since 1980, put in place by a Republican governor and Republican legislature, in those 40-some years, there's never been a legislator of either party that has introduced a bill to get rid of that system and go back to some system where the legislature decides. And that tells you how powerful it is and popular it is with the people of Iowa. But the problem with Iowa's system compared to us is, if this person keeps drawing the maps and the legislature can reject them, then he draws them again or she draws them again, then they reject them. And if they reject them the court rejects them 3 times, or the legislature rejects them 3 times in a row, it goes to the Iowa Supreme Court. Well, that's not what I want to do in Wisconsin. Because all you have to do is just make sure you don't pass it the first 3 times, and boom, it goes to court. If the court's your 4-3 or it's not your 4-3 or whatever. So I don't know, but we can do it. We can do an Iowa type system that's similar to it, but just what I would do is just say that you do that 3 times, it brings the map, and if the legislature can't pass it after 3 times, it becomes a law. Period. You know, we appeal it anywhere. And that's my first choice. My second choice actually would be federal judges. And why? They have life terms, and they have ethics rules, unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. And they did a great job in the 80s, 90s, and 2000. And let them draw the maps. And they don't need to run for re-election. They don't have to raise money. They don't have to, cozy with one party or the other. All that stuff is out of the way. That's the second way I would be fine with. And then you can have a commission. About 13 states have a commission where it's a completely nonpartisan commission. It's be like 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, 3 independents, or 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, but just a totally balanced commission. And they draw the maps. They get some staff to do it and so on, and help them. And that can work too. It's working in several states around the country. So that's kind of what I think it will work. And of course, I did not name the state Supreme Court as one of the solutions. Now, I honestly don't know how you get to the federal courts without maybe involving the state Supreme Courts. I don't know how doable that is, but the Iowa plan is best, and the commission plan will be fine too. So we'll see. But that's I tell you all about the book, you won't want to buy one. So can't do that. I just want to look at my notes to see if. I mean, and in terms of solution, the bottom line is you have to take it out of the hands of the legislature. That whatever system you go to is almost going to be better than leaving it to a legislature that has controlled by one party, governor and both houses. So you can't hardly go wrong by just picking any other system. Will make better. So I probably could go on and on here, but you folks probably want to get home before midnight. What? Maybe I'll just stop there, and maybe you got. I bet you get some questions I probably can't even answer. So, yes.
Real quick, just so those watching later at home have a chance to hear the questions, maybe if you give me a second to bring the mic to you so that for posterity.
What is your source of news that is not slanted and not opinion?
What is my source?
Source of news.
Oh, I watch CNN a lot. I read the State Journal. I sometimes read the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. I do read the Janesville Gazette, largely because I want to read the obituaries. Make sure I'm not in there first of all, and then do I know anybody? You know that, and it's all too sad. There's way too many, but those are my main sources. And I also have some good friends I've known for a long time whose judgment I trust, and I'll call them up and we talk. You know, one of them lives in Janesville, most of them don't, and just see what they say and what they think. And I've known long enough to know their judgment's going to be fair. You know, it's going to be what they really think. Yes.
Are you familiar with a website called ground.news?
No, I'm not.
Apparently, from what I understand about it, they go across some 15 different organizations, all from very conservative to very liberal. And then on different issues, they go to each of these sources and lay out what they're saying on the issue. And they have a little graphic showing lanes, basically, of far right, moderate right, all the way to far left, and the different news sources that fall into these different lanes. And it's useful to look at how different organizations actually talk about the same issue. And it's kind of a strange internet name, ground.news. But
Ground dot what?
Ground.news.
News?
And I find it to be useful in separating out biases.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I just wondered what your opinion might be about changing the Electoral College to Final Five or another way of voting. Besides a popular vote, there's Final Five, and there was another one that I just can't think of right now. Do you have any opinions about that?
I don't know about all those options much, but I'm kind of skeptical of that, because what we would have if we went back just to the raw popular vote, we'd have a presidential election in about 8 or 10 states. You could decide the election, and the candidates. I could say North Dakota, South Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming, and Idaho would never see a candidate for president ever. And I don't know if that's also good. So I really am sort of torn. I don't like the idea that somebody gets elected with a minority of the people, which happened, I think, was that W. Bush? Yeah.
And Trump.
And Trump, yeah. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Don't like that either, so I don't have a great solution in my own mind. Did you have a question? No.
Yeah. In regards to gerrymandering, I guess a couple things. We all know what happens, but I think something a lot of people don't understand is, take the city of Madison and the city of Milwaukee. They are very densely populated with Democrats. So sometimes during gerrymandering, there's packing of districts, but there's also packing of districts by the people by choice that live in those districts. And if you dilute those dense pockets like that, you're going to have districts that are strewn out all over the place again.
Yeah, actually, I think Speaker Voss had made that argument that was the Democrats self-pack by where they live. And the thing is, you could actually make the same case in the wild counties around Waukesha, Ozaukee. Those three counties they're sort of self-packed with Republicans too. So I don't know. I don't have a great. I don't know if that's all that valid of a concern, unless we're going to start telling people where they can live by their party registration. I don't know. Yes. Oh,
Changing the topic a little bit, could you share your experiences during the trips to Illinois, Act 10, and with Walker trying to stick I think the State Patrol on you and other people that were trying to do what we wanted?
yeah, it was something I never expected to do, I can tell you that. But there was never any doubt what it was going to do. Because the deal, we're talking now about 2011, was that the Senate is 33 people in the Senate members, so 17 is the majority, right? Except you have a bill that has money in it. They have like a supermajority requirement. It isn't just 17 out of 33. You have to have 20 out of 33. And so Republicans had 19 state senators. They needed one Democrat to stay in Madison, and they'd have the 20. They didn't need the Democrats' vote on the final passage. They just needed the Democrats' vote to have a quorum, say aye when they get there. And so, first of all, to anybody who knows me to think for 1 second that I would be the guy that stayed up there to provide the quorum vote, be nuts. But I also found out something that wasn't very publicly known, which was everybody thought that we had to get out of Wisconsin, and then we could just stay in Illinois, northern Illinois, or somewhere else. But the truth was, it was all about a quorum. We could have been in the hotel across the street from the Capitol and just sat there for 23 days, and they could not have compelled us to go back across the street to the Capitol. We didn't have to go all the way to Illinois. That was found out days after we were down there. But also, I live in a township, and the sheriff was Bob Spoden then, and then the police chief, who was not partisan at all, both told me that if I was in my house and they came to my house, they could not compel me to go back to Madison because I hadn't broken any laws. It's not against the law to be in your own home. And they said, so if they come to your house, you call us and we'll arrest them for trespassing on your property. So a lot of us who had homes within reasonable driving distance of northern Illinois actually went home a lot and came back and went back and forth, and that never worried about that at all once the sheriff and the police chief told me what the score was. But it was. But then other thing I'd like to tell people is that there's a fellow from Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and when he was in the Illinois legislature, it was like 1830 somewhere in there, he was opposed to a banking bill. He wanted to stop this banking bill, and the same details, same facts applied there, that they had to have a quorum to take up the banking bill that he was against. And they were building a new capitol, so the legislature was meeting in a church. I had a big enough space for the legislature to meet and all that. And what did Abraham Lincoln do? He climbed out of the window of the legislature, where was a church, and jumped down in the street, went off down the street, and to avoid a quorum. So he did exactly what we did. But I just wish we had that story on the front end of that trip down there. We're just going down and talk and see what Abraham Lincoln has to say about what we did, But that was kind of fun. But it was when we were down there, it was everybody pretty much got along, but it was actually pretty boring, frankly. I mean, be down there for parts of a lot of 23 days, and then we came back, and then we got the great big welcome back at the Capitol when we came back, which was nice. But I don't know if I should take the time to tell you this, but my brother, my older brother, he and his wife, Tom and Carol, they were down in Florida at a retirement facility there, and at that time in 2000, my years mixed up, in 2011, yeah, and he was sitting in a hot tub with this guy, and when we were going around the Capitol that day, Jesse Jackson had come up to join our walking around with us, and the crowd was so funny, happy and pleasant. It was really it was an ego trip to walk around there, I'll tell you. And there was that USA Today. Remember, that was a big time newspaper. Is it around at all anymore? USA Today. I never hear of it at all. But it was a big deal then. And they had a photographer there, and they wanted to take pictures of Jesse Jackson in the parade. Well, it turned out that the reporter was with the camera was right here taking his picture, and I'm walking in a camera sight, if you will, when he took the picture of Jesse. Well, it ends up on the front page of USA Today. It looks like I'm walking down the street with Jesse Jackson. So my brother's in the hot tub with this guy, and the guy's got the USA Today, and he says, "Look at those son of them." And he used the whole term. They can't wait to walk with Jesse Jackson. And here, it's my brother. It's his brother who's in the picture of me. I just thought that was pretty funny. And my brother's so mild-mannered, he just didn't make anything of it. And the guy got up and left and took his newspaper with him. But anyway. Well, any other questions? This has been enjoyable for me. I hope for you. I brought along a bunch of books, and I also brought along some of the GM book. And that book is entirely, all the costs for that book I paid for. I wrote it 5 years ago. So what I wanted to do, why I brought it along was, if you want to buy my book, which is $19 with the sales tax, I would sell you the GM book for $10, and that $10 is all profit. So I know our bills to pay for writing that book, to editor, publisher, printer, et cetera, et cetera. So if anybody's interested, I brought them along. It doesn't entirely up to anybody that's interested, but yes.
Tell us more about the foundation that gets the profit.
I was on the Janesville School Board in 2008, and I would visit some schools, and every school I visited, all I saw were white teachers, but I saw kids of color. And so I asked the superintendent, what percent of the kids are kids of color, and what percent of the teachers are teachers of color? Turned out that the teachers were 99.5% white, and 1% people of color, and the students were 16% students of color, and it was going like this. And so I had this idea, well, start a foundation, all private money, and give scholarships to students who, if they want to be teachers and want to agree to teach in Janesville, and they have to get hired in Janesville, which they don't control. That's what the foundation is all about. And then Sue helped a lot too. We helped start the same kind of foundation in Beloit, call it Grow Your Own. So the profits from this book or the other book, whatever, the profits go to those two foundations equally, half to Janesville and half to Beloit is the plan. And we've now got, I'm really proud of where we're going now. We're finally starting to crank. We've never had more than, Sue helped me start the foundation. Without Sue, I don't know how I put it together. She was running the Community Foundation of Southern Wisconsin at that time. But we've never had more than 10 scholarship winners in college at the same time, freshman through senior year. And this fall, we have 20. And so, yeah. That's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. And one of our problems has been, it's sort of like a good problem in a bigger picture, is these kids are bright kids, but really much aware of the outside world or what they could be in life. And so win our scholarship, they're going to be a teacher. They get to college, they find out they can be a lawyer, a doctor, accountant, you name it. They have the brains and talent to do it. So we've lost a few good ones for that reason. One of them was a Hispanic young woman who was a senior and was just a 4-point and everything else. And all this stuff down at the border with people coming across, not having legal representation and so on. In her senior year, she decided she's going to become a lawyer and go to the border and represent those migrants. And we always talk to them. I always try to talk to whoever drops out to see why, did we do something wrong or whatever. And I said to her, I said, I really hate losing you, but boy, what a great reason to lose you. And so I lost track of her. I don't know how she's doing. Have you ever heard anything? Sue's been on our board since day one, since 2009. I think we finally get it off the ground, I think in 09, or was it 08? It was 8, okay, yeah. So we started out with just Janesville kids of color who were eligible. And we figured out, our goal is to get teachers of color, not that they have to live in Janesville. So we changed them, who could apply. And it really can be literally anybody, but it's, anyway, I had one woman who was working in a daycare program. She was 32 years old, had a couple years of college already, and she just loved working with kids in a daycare center and decided she wanted to be an elementary school teacher and applied, and I don't know where she is, whether she's through college now or not, or I don't know. But so we've had all kinds of, and then the Whitewater School of Education, they knew about our scholarship program. They loved our scholarship program, but most of their students, of course, didn't live in Janesville. They were in Whitewater, from Milwaukee, everywhere, all over. So that has brought in a lot more great applicants, and that contributes to us having 20 in college now, because we got a whole lot more applicants, and we've raised enough money to be able to give them all a scholarship and keep them going. And Beloit, their numbers are a little better. About 78%, no, 68% of the students in Beloit are kids of color, and 18% of their teachers are teachers of color. So they're not really matched, but they're doing better than we are. But they've had trouble raising money down there from the community. The teachers are giving a lot of the money there. They got some issues, and then some conservative law firm, believe it or not, they allege that their program, scholarship program, is discriminatory. And it sure is. I mean, what their argument? White kids are not eligible for the scholarship. And the school district sort of caved in because they were not caved in, but they would have had to hire lawyers to fight them and all that stuff, and they got financial problems already without having more of them. So they have now changed the program to they conceded now white kids can apply, but they said they have to show an interest in the issues involved and understanding and blah blah blah. So the people who run the Grow Your Own program, the teachers, they're looking at they're not going to put up with that. So they will move to somebody else. They could be a 501c3 on their own, or they've actually talked to the NAACP, and they might be interested in having them attached to them and so on. So it'll somehow keep going. But that all happened after I decided to give them half the money from the book, but it will be used well. And then I thought if it completely blew up down there and they couldn't have the thing, they have a version of ECHO in Beloit. It's called Caritas is the name of the group. And I would just give the money to Caritas. I mean, I'll end up giving the money to some good cause in Beloit, but hopefully it will be Grow Your Own program. They can get that figured out, but good people.
Yeah, Tim, as a parent of an African-American son who went all the way through Janesville School District without ever having an African-American teacher, I really appreciate the work you and Sue have done to set up these scholarships and to dedicate the resources from the book to that. Without trying to prolong the evening too much, I'm also with the League of Women Voters and the Fair Maps Coalition of Wisconsin for creating permanent, nonpartisan redistricting process in the future, which would probably entail a constitutional amendment. And I wondered if you had any comment about how that might come about so we don't revisit this gerrymandering process in the future.
Well, I think my shortcoming is that I'm pretty sure I know how to, what is a good fix, but getting from here to the fix, I'm no genius on how that happens, and I don't know if anybody is. I've talked to executive director of Common Cause, Jay Heck, who I've worked with for quite a while. He, by the way, helped me. He would find sources for me for the book. And it was a big help. And I don't know if anybody really knows that the answer to how these, I mean, it's pretty clear how you can get to an Iowa system. The legislature just has to pass it and the governor signs it. And you can have an Iowa system. But I don't know. And you know, you mentioned your son. That was the thing. Those of us that are white, I mean, I never had any doubt I was going to be a high school social studies teacher. Why wouldn't I think I could be? Every teacher I had from kindergarten through senior year was white. And so I could be one. But if you're a kid of color and you never see somebody that looks like you for 12 years, why do you think automatically you could be a teacher? You might, but how do you know that? So that's a big part of it. And I also think it's good for white kids because they are going to live in the most racially diverse America that we've ever had. And if they just have people of influence and power who are white, you know, counselors and teachers and superintendents. We have a superintendent of color in Janesville now, of course. And then they get out of school, and their first job, their supervisor, is a person of color. They've never had somebody in a position of authority that they ever saw who was other than white. So I think it helps white kids get ready for the world. They say that it's either 2040 or for sure by 2050, for the first time in American history, white people will still be the largest group, but for the first time will not be a majority of the United States. It'll be 45 or 48%, but for the first time ever. So that, you know, who you go to church with and who you work with and everything else is going to change for this generation like it has not changed for any generation before them. Yes, I'm sorry.
Just for my information, if it's correct, in the state of Wisconsin, which party has the most, are there more Democrats than Republicans or vice versa, or are they kind of evenly split?
Well, I don't know if either party's ever introduced or released their total actual members of parties. But if you look at the top of the ticket election results over the last 10 years, we're evenly divided, unbelievably. Now, on the election day, you know, independents vote one party or the other, so it doesn't completely answer your question. But I mean, we've had, I think there was Tammy Baldwin won last time, I think, with 54% or something like that. That's like the biggest margin of victory. I mean, you've seen these last two presidential elections. They're not a big 51-49. They're a lot less than 51-49. So the state, as to how the people in the state vote, we're pretty even. But that may not be the same as you're talking about maybe belonging to a party or considering yourself a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, my next question is then, after they gerrymandered things, did the Republican Party gain a lot more seats in Congress than they used to have?
That's an entirely separate map drawing operation, but it's amazing what goes on with our congressional delegation. What they've done over the decades, and I watched them from going back in 1980, what they would do is the lead Democrat and the delegation from Wisconsin and the lead Republican was Dave Obey and a Sensenbrenner for a long time. They would get together, and each one would pick their most vulnerable member. Dave Obey would pick the most vulnerable Democrat, and Sensenbrenner would pick the most vulnerable Republican. And they would draw maps that helped those two. And the rest of them needed less help because they already had a pretty safe district or whatever. And that's how, I mean, and then once they had that map, then they come to Madison, because we had to pass it. They come to Madison and say, don't mess with our map, pass it the way it is, you know. And it was an easy vote for everybody, because, you know, okay, well, fine, go ahead, you guys want it. It's your world, you guys run it the way you want to. But one of those results was this third congressional district, which was a big one in this election this fall, the one that's basically always historically a Mississippi River district, basically from the state line up to north of Eau Claire. And they were trying to help the Democratic congressman at the time named Ron Kind. And so what they did was, and they were trying to help a Republican too. And the issue was Portage County, where Stevens Point is, very, very big Democratic county. It was in the Republican congressman from north of there. It was in his congressional district. He didn't want Stevens Point. He didn't want Stevens Point at all. Ron Kind would love to have Stevens Point. So that's what the leadership agreed to. And if you look at that 3rd district today, it is, as it always was, is kind of county or two wide sometimes from up above Eau Claire all the way to the state line, right through La Crosse. And then there's this little strip that leaves the La Crosse area. Goes sometimes like a township wide, sometimes a little wider than that, all the way from La Crosse to Stevens Point, to put Portage County and Stevens Point in that Democratic congressman's district and get it out of the Republican congressman who didn't want it anymore. I mean, that's going on right now. That's why I thought the Dems that ran from Stevens Point had an uphill deal. She was running for that congressional seat, but she's from Stevens Point, and near the whole, 90% of the district is over in the Mississippi River. Probably more information than you needed to know, but.
It seems to me that Janesville and Rock County, but speaking particularly of Janesville, that we have a hard time getting funding for our schools because we had General Motors for a long time, and someplace along the line, I was left with the impression that they looked at General Motors doing a lot for Janesville, so Rock County and Janesville did not need the money as badly as some other place. And I don't know if that was absolutely true, if they share funds, but we've been without Janesville, or without General Motors for a long time, and Parker Penn for a long time. At one time, those were, I think, the 2 biggest employers in Janesville. And does the gerrymandering influence that, or how do we get the funding from the state to help our city?
Well, I'm going to ask Sue if she's willing to say something about it, because I know she knows about it. I know I'm not putting you on the spot. I know you know about this, but what's happened in Janesville, it's sort of related to what you're talking about. Is if you look at the unemployment rate in Janesville today, it's like 3.4%. It's a low number. But if you look at the hourly wage today versus the hourly wage when GM was here, it's not even close. The UAW guys are making $28 an hour on the line. The year they closed in 08, and I talk to some guys in the UAW now and say that extrapolated for inflation, that $28 an hour in 2008 would be $45 an hour in 2024. And so what's happened is there are jobs here. They're almost all non-union jobs for one thing, but they're paying. I don't know of any manufacturing jobs that pay more than $20 an hour in Janesville. And I say I don't know. Well, that doesn't mean there isn't some. Nobody's ever told me about them, and I've tried to find out. And so what you have is, in talking about the kids, those families now with 2 jobs, whatever, to try to make things work, their kids still need an education too. So to not have our state aid, take into account those adjustments is really what is really so unfair. And I know Sue's tried to fight it, but maybe anything you want to put you on the spot.
I should probably use the mic.
Yeah.
School funding in our state is broken. It's antiquated. It doesn't work for any community any longer. That's why we see so many operating referendums going on all over our state. There's a whole bunch more this coming November, including one for Janesville. So there's multiple layers to school funding. It's very complicated, and I think I've always said since I ran, we should start over. Right? We really should start over and create a funding system that works for everyone, but there's not enough political will to do that. So we keep chipping away at the edges, and communities like Janesville have to keep going to referendum to get folks like you to say, yes, we want to support our school system, and we will pay more money. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's a complicated There's not a clear solution, really.
Another thing that's contributed to it was that when Governor Walker was elected and had that majority, a lot of them were big supporters of charter schools and private schools and so on. And if you go back and look at the state, we have a two-year budget, biennial budget, and in that budget is the big chunk of money for public education. Come back to the school districts. He recommended, and his legislature went along with, very modest increases. I mean, the total number around the state, it's in the B's, it's in the billions. It goes for public education, for 400 and some school districts. But the dollar increase would look impressive unless you knew what it was an increase off of what big number. You know, it was like, if the total number was like 20 billion, it was like $145 million increase. So the increase was actually 1.5% of the budget. And you do that for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, 6 years, because it's biennial budget. And you get way behind. And that's a big part of what has happened. And because now to catch up for all those losses, you'd have to ask the legislature to be voting for a few $1 billion more to make up for that shrinkage or not adequate increase, I guess would be the way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, looking ahead to the future.
Hold on, one sec.
Looking ahead. And one of the things I got involved in is Project 2025 in education. Now, if you want an eye-opening experience and then looking forward to how the states are going to be handling that, get that PDF, read that education side of it. It goes very deep, and there's some going on, I think, right now in the state planning, looking ahead. And I just want people to think about that. Also, we're in the agriculture area. Read that one. If you want to see where the state government, they're going to be turning a lot over to the state, and they're going to be demanding more from the state taxpayers. Read the agriculture one too.
Anybody else?
Maybe time for one more question, then we want to make sure we leave time for the book sale and signing afterwards. Here.
My turn? Why are we a swing state? I mean, we don't have a large population, what, 5 million? Illinois has got twice as many, right? Why are we a swing state?
Well, it's because, like, for example, Illinois is a sure thing. Illinois is going to vote Democrat.
Pennsylvania is a huge population, too.
But they're like closer to being a 50-50 state, whereas Illinois is a wired Democratic state. And there's wired Republican states, too. So they just don't, they're not in play. We already know what's going to happen there in November. So where is it unclear where it's going to happen? And we're one of those states, because you look at the past elections, they've been closer than 51-49 the last 2 presidential elections. Good. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you.